Yes. Today we're going to start with the next knowledge area, second knowledge area, one of the most important thing. If you know your scoping right, uh, there's no, sorry, then you are basically destined for success. Creating the scope or basically, align the project as per the scope is one of the most important thing project manager does normally on day-to-day basis. So we're going to understand the project scope management today. Now, could anybody tell me what is the scope? We have understood scope in the use case diagram, high level diagram. Plus, we have discussed scope at length in our business analyst class, right? Anybody, just give a try. What do you
Basically
mean by
requirements. Basically requirements.
uh,
What is in scope? What is to be done as part of the project?
yeah?
Yeah. What is a part of the project and what are the limitations?
Yes, what are the total work need to be done. That's
Yes.
right. Perfect. Requirement is a kind of generic list, and it's more of a kind of what needs to be done. Okay, but the totality, the limits of where we have to stop, and what is not included in the scope. That's also kind of one of the most critical factor project manager has to learn or has to basically implement on the real time, and that's why we need to understand the scope in depth here, and we have a couple of hands-on experience as well, and for that let's start with this understanding of scope management. The scope management includes process required to ensure project includes all work related and only work related to complete the project successful. See, there was a thought process before 1960s, 70s that if you do some value add to the client is happy. But you are doing value add at a cost at your resources, time, schedule, everything, right? So then within 1990s and ahead, the management institutes and various other bodies also believe that let's stop this value add thing, because this value add killing us our the project profitability and the other stuffs. So what they try to do, they try to limit the scope to the only whatever included in the scope kind of scenario, and they included a paragraph within SRS or within the functional space we can shrink out of scope. So now if you look at the functional specification which are normally created by the designer and the architects, they include a paragraph called out of scope, and there they normally mention the wish list which are given, which are not part of this development as of in this phase or in this part of the project. And that's how out of scope is also one of the most crucial thing we need to consider as a project manager. And as far as the first time project manager, this is the learning which we normally well, I have learned it the hard way, because we have from an area where we used to do quite a few add-ons, value add, and try to butter up the client left and right. But now after let's say 2000 or so, this what you can say extra spending is limited, or they curtail this extra spending and say no, whatever in the scope will give that much, and that should give us the satisfaction. That's what the satisfaction we are trying to. If the project is time and material, they might be okay to add something after client approves it, and that can be a included part of flexible scope, and we understand that. But still, unless and until it is included in the scope, we will not go for it. Okay, so let's try to understand from our standard practices as per the input output thought process, right? So here we have planning process group. We have 4 processes. One is plan scope management, collect requirements, define scope, and create WBS. And then we have in monitoring and controlling, validate scope and control scope. So we need to validate scope almost on every stage of the project, and even control scope on every stage of the project. And there's nothing in initiating process group and executing process group or closing process group. So we are going to start with planning process group. So this means that whatever processes we are adopting for scope, we have to plan it better. We need to monitor and control it. That's all. Okay, so let's understand step by step. Now here we are widening our horizons to basically understand the scope management better, or understand the overall how we read the PMP better. Okay, so under project scope management, we have these 6 process group. Plan scope management, the process creating a scope management plan that documents how the project and project scope will be defined, validated, and controlled. Now, this is already included in the functional requirement specification, so the project manager can just copy it from there. And in case if they need scope update, the functional specification is a live document, but whatever plan of we create in terms of integration planning or scope management planning, these are also live document, so we can really replicate or refer. Nowadays all these cloud documents, you refer to a para from different document also, because all these cloud elements, they normally deployed on a content management system. Content management system is basically allows you to refer the content across the documents very easily, like a web page click. So if you click web page, it will take you to another web page. So when I say plan scope management, I'll click somewhere where it will take you to actual the scope which is mentioned in the requirement document. Scope mentioned in the SRS or FRS, depending upon the finality of the scope or approved scope, wherever you have mentioned as per the company policies and procedure. The next process group is collect requirement. Here, collecting means validating. Collecting means trying to collect the detail, trying to collect the conciseness of it, the completeness of a requirement. They are not, as a project manager, you're not expect to start collecting requirement again, because we have collected the requirement. The business analysis team is helping us out to collect the requirement. So here collection means validating. Let's try to understand in the exact word. The process of determining, documenting and managing stakeholder needs and requirements to meet the project objectives. So here what they are referring to basically the RTM, requirement traceability matrix. Determining means which are validated in the scope. Documenting in the sense have the document exact requirement and the traceability of it, how it's generated, where it's generated, how it's progressed, because the requirements validity and the background also a need of the project, because unless and until you know the background, the requirement doesn't make any much sense, right? So you need to understand the background of the requirement as well. And then managing the stakeholder needs. This is one of the most important part in a project management, because unless you understand and manage the needs in terms of priorities, scenarios, which stakeholders are more crucial to the project development, how we can diplomatically say, let me park this for the next sprint and all those things, we'll understand that as well. But the most important part is how to collect these requirements and need to meet project objectives. No value adds, just meet the project objectives what are included in the scope. Now 5.3 is define scope, the process of developing a detailed description of the project and product. So what we are trying to do here, a detailed description of project and product. Here we are trying to understand what needs to be done exactly in terms of either solution, product, or services. We are considering exact things what needs to be done. In use case diagram, could you remember the block where the system includes all those stuff inside the box? Similarly in HLD. So whenever you say a requirement of having a centralized database for enhancing attendance management solution. So what I'll say, yes. So what I'll included, if user logs into the enhanced attendance management system type of solution, he will have a login procedure. Then he'll check leaves of a couple of person, his day in day out times, and so on, so right, like a typical attendance management system. But when you talk about something like historical holiday trend analysis, that might not be included. If the clients want to include, we might get it included. But as by definition, as by basic background and the thought process of a core project objective, this might not be the scenario, because we don't have to consider or get all the historical data from the other system which were basically maintaining the attendance previously. But yes, we need to consider at least the last 5 years to make sure our that privilege leave, this leave, that leave has to be tracked down and adjusted correctly. So that's kind of included in the scope. But if you look at the detailed trend analysis before, let's say, from the last 10 years or so, then it's out of scope. And so we have to clearly state those things in the diplomatic way, of course, and we'll learn in the communication what you mean by dissemination of information, or how you can control the communication to make sure the other party gets the messages loud and clear, only it doesn't sound that you are being insubordinate. And that's how
So,
we do. That's what we call diplomatically handling the things. Yes. Anybody have any question for me at this moment?
so basically this means scope is basically the content of the SRS, right? Because that details the
That's
requirements.
totality of requirement. Whatever client says is required is required. Even client can include library management system in the attendance management system. Possible? Yes, possible. Because that's what client needs and he's ready to pay, right? Pay for it. So, we are okay with that as well. But it should be clearly included and it has to be accounted for and client is ready to pay for. And that's the most important part of it. Okay? Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Yeah, so this is basically the SRS document, no? The third part?
No, you can't just say SRS document, because SRS document might have executive summary, might have, out of scope kind of para, might have various other things, right? The scope is basically what needs to be done. So it can be something like, you can call it a requirement list in totality. You can consider what work items or activity list which client have clearly mentioned for the work to be done in this project, whatever project is named. Say it's like enhancing attendance management solution. That's what the typical project we were discussing from start. So here, whatever State Farm says, which is inclusion in the project of enhancing attendance management solution, that's what the scope is.
Yeah, that's right.
If the client is not included anything above and beyond, then it's not part of the scope. As a project manager, we don't have to what I can say. We don't have to invent anything new to add or to give it to the client. That's what it means. Okay. Now, another most important part here, create a WBS, and we are going to do a hands-on workshop on these as well. WBS is a work breakdown structure or activity breakdown structure or task breakdown structure, but it's normally referred as WBS globally. The process of subdividing a project deliverables and a project work into smaller and more manageable components. To approach this practicability, this is the definition of WBS. To approach WBS practically, we do it even in our day-to-day life. We don't know it, but this gives you a scientific approach to do your WBS, to plan your task of the day in a clear sense, in a scenario, in a clear aspects. Let me tell you what. WBS is basically you break down the work. So if I might want to make a tea, you can call it activity, task, or work item. Doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, let's call it activity. Okay. So you can call it activity breakdown structure, but normally in North America and Canadian region, this is referred as a WBS only. Okay. So whenever you say you want to understand how effectively I can, improve my process of making a tea in the morning. I'm just taking a sample. Don't feel offended if you drink coffee. So when I get up in the morning, what I need to have that pot, tap water, and tea powder. So what I'll make sure, I'll keep the tea powder pot, tap, and the pot near the sink, near the water tap, so that whenever I get up in the morning, I'll take the water, I'll pour the tea, tea powder, and put it on the stove or a gas or induction, whatever you have, so that at least first step is addressed at the efficient level. Means I don't have to really search for a pot or a tea powder in the morning. Well, the tap, of course, don't go anywhere, so tap is there. But still, I might miss my teapot, because teapots are specific. They have their smell, they have their blackness and all those things. In reality, and every time you don't throw the old pot, right? You normally go with the old pot, whatever you have. So this way, you can make sure whatever you do in terms of activity, you can efficient it. And next step, you might need to add some masala. What type of masala do you need? This powder, that powder. You'll make sure you have those things before you start making tea, so that whenever it comes to boil, either before or after, depending upon your thought process, depending upon your policies and procedure, you add those to the tea, make it to the boil, Then if you need a cream, add a cream, sugar, cubes, whatever, and then pour the tea into that and start drinking a really good hot cup of tea. Somebody might put the, milk also in the tea to get it boiled. Depending upon your processes, policies and procedure, you can make the tea making also a really efficient process. And this is how we normally get improved with the WBS. Okay, so work breakdown section is really a great way to improve your life rather than just the project. Okay, and we'll learn both basically one way or the other. Then if you move to the monitoring and controlling process scope, we have two processes: validate scope and control scope. What do you mean by validate? This again relates to not including anything above and beyond of scope. So what you do, you keep asking this question: is it included in the scope? Is client is going to pay for it? If yes, then go ahead. If no, then yes. Don't sweat. Don't waste your time. Don't waste your time as well as resource time. Resource here, man, material, machine. Every additional task needs some schedule, needs some efforts, and needs some raw material. That's why we need to really cautious about doing any value add to the project. Then control scope, and control scope means whatever is out of scope, let's not include it in a scope. And as a first time project manager, you normally keep doing this thing in the in the stage of what you can say hyperactivity, or in the stage of enthusiasm, you might do this thing. So controlling scope is one of the most key aspect we need to learn if you are a first time project manager, because the process of monitoring the status of a project and product and managing the changes of a scope baseline. Okay, let me read the 5.5 plus. Pardon me for that. Validating scope, the process of formalizing acceptance of a completed project deliveries. Now, what does this mean? These are the set of requirement, and this is what we deliver. Could you please check on, is it work with whatever the requirements have we given? Actually, validate scope means the quality control of it. So what we do in normal day, today's practical outlook, this is the delivery, this is the requirement or the RTM. Those were the test cases mentioned in the RTM, and you can validate the test case run report with the delivery. What is a test case run report? When you have a requirement called attendance has to be notified on the centralized server. This is my functional requirement, or this is my requirement to be precise. Then as a test case, I'll have an integration test case saying I need to verify if the attendance get notified centrally. So if there's a person called Ravindra Pande attending the Bloomington office of a State Farm, I'm sitting in Chicago or New York, should be able to check out his in time, out time for a given day. If it's not, reached office, or if he or she is not left the office, then of course I can't, because practically it's impossible. But overall, otherwise I should be able to do it. And these are facility given to the HR person, senior executive, junior executive, depending as per the requirement. Now, what we need to do, we need to run this test case, and then we'll have something called run test case run report. And this is the kind of output of a quality control phase. Now, this run report is normally an Excel sheet, which we normally include in our deliverable. So whenever you give this software to the client, hand over through cloud, CDs, well, we don't use floppy nowadays, or pen drive, whatnot. Normally it's delivered on the cloud. We'll attach this test run reports, and this test run report is like kind of audit, right? Or it's kind of quality control output. So that's normally marked with the exact date, exact resources who have executed this test case. So this test case run report gives the client saying, oh yes, so you can validate, you can see the attendance from the remote. So it's at a centralized process. It has a centralized place, and that's what this validate scope means. The process of formalizing acceptance of a completed project deliverable. So clients will say, oh yes, yeah. So I checked out my New York, correspondent can see so and so's attendance report, and that's the requirement is complete, and my RTM is marked as a completed. The requirement testability matrix marked as a completed requirement, and this means that that scope is accepted, and we generate enough satisfaction whatever we are planned for. So nowadays for each and every requirement, I have to get it mark completion from a client or approved from a client, like he validated and checked these requirements. Then the last one is control scope. Now again, we discuss this again, but we'll again repeat this thing. The process of monitoring the status of a project or a product or services, scope, and managing changes to the scope baseline. What does this mean? We don't go above and beyond of the scope or scope baseline. Scope baseline is basically a logical boundary where you shouldn't go beyond. That's what it means. The scope baseline is basically the line of the scope controlling. And in the use case diagram or HLD, these are normally high level diagram. These are normally denoted as the rectangular box, right? It can be, vertically rectangular or horizontal rectangular, depending upon your, length and breadth of your diagrams. So this way, this is what actually the controlling of the scope. So we need to make sure, and as a first-time project manager, I'm repeating again just to make sure, even by whenever you are explaining your functionality for a given product, let's not go overboard. And there are good interviewers who normally make sure, as a project manager, you normally know how to control scope. And how do you will make sure? Just address the scope as inclusion or exclusion. And that's a kind of first step. And just to make sure you include whatever is included, you exclude whatever is not included. So out of scope is out of scope. As a project manager, I don't additionally collect requirement. I don't change the scope. I'm not talking about can I, can't I, but I normally don't unless and until client is ready to pay, because every scope, every addition to the scope requires certain resources. It requires certain time and efforts to get it done. That's why whatever is above and beyond, and every project manager thinks my client is the best because he's paying me and so on and so forth, I'll do these small things for him. But no, if you keep doing this thing, client will get habituated. He might come back to you as an unsatisfied client, like you've done 6 things for me, but you have not done this one thing. And this is actual practicability of life. The people who attach to you are normally expect you to do everything free of cost, but if you miss just one, you'll get blamed for the life. This is the sad reality, believe me. And the project manager also believes these things. I'm not trying to be pessimistic here, but you might have experienced this thing in your life. That's why the scope management is basically a kind of a part of personality. And if you can manage the scope very well, you'll be the hell happy person. You can be autocratic, but still liked by all. Like Hitler. Well, Hitler is not liked by all, but if you really, try to understand his philosophy of taking his, country to the top, I still, I'm kind of like that person. Forget about the things, whatever he did to, Jews and, those are the bad, definitely. But overall, the way he autocratically enhanced Germany to the next level, that makes him a really, really great leader. That makes him really, really great politician. And that's why everybody likes to respect, this guy, Hitler. Same thing with George Washington, or many various American presidents for that matter. Even if Margaret Thatcher was one of the great autocratic PM in Europe, in UK predominantly, and everybody respect that. Like Indira Gandhi in India, why everybody respect them? Because they are autocratic, but still respected because they have clear thought process of their scope, what needs to be done, what not needs to be done. And they have worked on their own thought process and addressed it quite effectively. Does that make sense to you?
Yes.
Yeah. So we need to really understand what is inclusion and exclusion. And this way, we have to make sure whatever we included as a project manager, as a leader, it's getting paid, is getting appreciated. Otherwise, even if you do value add and you might miss certain corner, you'll have a really big unsatisfied client at your hands, and that's not what we are looking for. Okay, so let me move forward. The first one is plan scope management. Again, this is a planning activity. Here we are trying to basically validate a scope in one way or the other, or here we are trying to basically make sure you got the complete scope. If there are any pitfalls, you might check out with the stakeholders. You might check out with the designer and architect first. Then you might go with the scrum master because he normally have the scope inclusions. Then you can go to the client executives or the product owner if that's the need. So here let's try to understand from input and outputs perspective. The project charter is one of the prominent input here, because normally, as madam have clearly said, a list of requirements are included in SRS or a project charter. So we normally refer this document to make sure we have everything which we need to deliver it to the client. Then the different management plan, we have a quality management plan, project life cycle description, and development approach. Now all these three things are new. The quality management plan is basically the adherence to the QMS of an organization. I'll repeat, the compliance to the QMS of the organizations you are working with. So if I'm working with Infosys, I'll adhere to, I'll stick to, I'll abide by the quality management system of Infosys. What does it mean? It means that I'll follow the policy and procedures mentioned in the QMS. I'll follow the templates which are given there. So if I have to create a project management plan or a quality management plan or a scope management plan, I'll use those templates which are specifically designed for me. Same thing with WBS also. Okay. So here quality management plan is basically talks about adherence to the QMS for maximum project efficiency. And this also means the organizational process assets in many other ways. This will make your project much standardized project across the organization, much disciplined approach to the project management across the organization. Then we have project lifecycle description. Here we clearly mention what type of project methodology have you chosen. Have you chosen waterfall? Have you chosen Agile XP, Agile Scrum? Have you chosen scaled Agile? Have you chosen ITISM? Whatnot. There are dime a dozen to choose from. But depending upon your QMS, there are clear description. So whenever you have these called kickoff meetings, wherever we actually adopt the knowledge and gain from the business analysis team, that time the PMOs of the world, the senior management of the world, basically discuss with the project management what type of methodology are you looking for. So you can clearly say most of the time it's Agile Scrum because it's one of the most matured, most well documented, most disciplined methodology. So there's a lesser work on a project management shoulder for planning and reiterating the wheel, reinitiating the wheel or reinventing the wheel. But if you look at other project management methodology, there are some work needs to be done. If the templates are available or not, you need to check. You need to check if we have the SMEs for the given processes or policies, or are we going heavy in those management approaches or project management methodology. So you normally choose or normally directed by the seniors to choose a project management methodology as a top-down approach. So here we decide which type of project lifecycle descriptions I need to adopt to. Then we have development approach. Again, nowadays we have something called development plus operational approach called DevOps. And that's a standard practices to adopt DevOps. What is DevOps? DevOps is kind of management methodology, latest management methodology where you have a number of tools to be adopted for a project lifecycle. What are these number of tools? To start with, requirement gathering. So we have finalized on Excel, or we have finalized on mind tree diagram. We are finalized on fishbone diagram, SWOT analysis. What all? It's already defined and included in the project directory of yours, and you have to just use that template, whatever you're going to use as a development approach. Then for testing, you have these two. You have Selenium, you have JUnit, whatnot, depending upon the technologies and the domain you are working for. The organization does this development approach selection for you. Mostly the life cycle as well as development approach, these all are perforated from the top management, because all these templates have to be defined, have to be created to help project manager not to waste time in creating a new template. And then going through auditors, like why I should have included that and this, why should I have included that and this, because every auditor's thought process might be different. Auditors are human, right? But just to make sure, whenever you choose a standardized template, auditors also happy because they know you have 10 different chapters, and in 10 different chapters they have to address all 35 entities, elements within those chapters for a given template. I'm just sharing a raw sample here. It could be 3 chapters and 4 elements depending on the chapter and the paragraphs and all those things, depending on the template also. So here, when you use this template from a matured organizations, the life is really easy and you don't have to waste your time in reinventing a wheel for a template. And also there's a template for developers, designers, architect, the testers, the quality control, the release manager, and everybody on the board. So that the approach is disciplined. Nobody wastes their time in creating new template. And that's what the most efficient way of executing a project. Why do we include it in the scope management plan? Because this is the scope of work we are defining. This is the basic planning of a scope, limitations. And that's why these are all things included in the scope management plan. Then of course, we have enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets to help us out in almost every plan building. Let's try to understand tools and techniques. Of course, we have SMEs, COMEs, and the PMOs of the world to guide you throughout the whole project life cycle. And they'll guide you to make sure you do this project execution efficiently. If you are a first-time project manager, you might be assigned to a senior project manager as an assistant project manager or an APM. That's what they normally label to. Now, there are data analysis, like alternative analysis. In the scenario, why we have chosen this project management methodology, well, we can have an alternative analysis because I can clearly see it's most disciplined, matured. I have so many templates at hand, I don't have to develop a single template additionally, as simple as that. Or why I have chosen waterfall, because requirements have been frozen. And I can do the most efficient project management if you normally work with waterfall. So you have clear demarcation of stage. You don't have to go back anytime soon unless and until one life cycle completes. And that's why basically you have chosen waterfall. Depending upon the scenario, policies and procedures, you normally do the data analysis for the required selection done by you. Then of course we plan various meetings just to make sure I am not going out of the scope. And these are meeting with the stakeholders, clients, depending upon the requirement of the hour or the time. Then the output, of course, the scope management plan and requirement management plan. I would really love here, rather than requirement plan, management plan, requirement traceability matrix. But as requirement management plan includes requirement traceability matrix, also the list of requirement in a separate table. So that's why requirement management plan will also do. So here the update goes to the actual scope management plan. How are we going to manage the scope? When you have a scope, what you can say, periodic audits. Yes, you normally have a project audit, and scope management audit is one of the most prominent audit you do, prominent review you do for a given project. Okay, and that's what it's mentioned in the scope management plan. When I want to review my scope, of course you review your scope whenever there's a new requirement, even through change control board. But still, as a manager, I normally check the scope almost every hour, if not every day. And believe me, that's a practice you will get into whenever you start working on a project. Because I need to keep track of, all the estimations, all the schedule, resource plans and everything. And that's why we normally manage the scope almost on an hourly basis, if not daily basis. Then we have requirement management plan. So here I'll make sure if there any addition, subtraction, modification to the requirement, is scope inclusion. Is it included in the scope? If not, then I'll really escalate this thing to the either PMO or whatever defined in the QMS. If QMS allows me to directly call a client and discuss the additional scope, I might do that as well. But depending upon the quality policies and procedures adopted by your project management execution, you normally stick to those plans. Does anybody have any question on plan scope management here?
So can you elaborate a little bit on managing the scope every hour?
Yes, sure, definitely. See, ma'am,
Okay.
what I'll do, I'll park this question for couple of slides, because we want to understand what is in terms of scope actually. When we do the WBS, we have a process called WBS, work breakdown structure or activity
Yeah.
breakdown,
Okay.
right?
Sure.
There
Yeah.
we have a list of activity. So if there's any additional activity or work item, I normally review the whole scope and normally make sure if that is in line with the primary scope. Primary scope is like enhancing attendance management solution. So when I talk about parking management solution, normally it's not inclusion, right? So I'll clearly mark it to the client. You say, boss, you, I think by mistake added this line in your requirement saying we need to manage the parking as well. Now, as a client, he'll come to you and saying, see, project manager, for attendance, if they don't have parking, they might have to go three street down the line. And then there's a big challenge because then, the attendance get delayed, right? So please consider this as an inclusion. He also tried to be diplomatic, but you need to really and clearly understand your thought process. Parking management is not a part of attendance management. And you need to explain it so. And that's why negotiation is a really important skill or for a project manager. And whenever you start working as a project manager, these are the diplomatic things, or these are the what you can say conflicts you need to manage on almost day-to-day basis. And I'm not talking about the product owner. Any client executive comes to you with additional requirement. This is like Mera Wala Green. Have you seen the ad Mera Wala Green?
Mhm.
Okay, I'll explain to others whoever don't know. A lady picks up a capsicum from a sabji market or vegetable market, goes to a wool vendor saying, okay, I need this green wool to get a sweater for my whatever husband, daughter, son, whatnot. But if you held the capsicum in sunlight, there are various gradients to the green. It's not one green across all, right? So that's the challenge. So when you talk about scope, you have to understand exact scope rather than Mera Wala Green. Just remember this example and you'll basically understand what is Mera Wala Green. Client is always going to come to you with Mera Wala Green, but you need to understand the capsicum don't have a uniform green color everywhere. So there's a bottom dark, top light, or there are some lighter veins, and so on and so forth. So which green? You need to really zero down to one green in a number, saying it's normally the color on laptop, computer, desktop, servers are defined in the hex. It's like 4 pairs of hex. Hex means 1 to 16, those digits, right? So 000000000 is a black color. 11111111111 is a white color. These are Microsoft standards. So if you go to Unix, Linux, the range are different. Now, in between 0 to 1, you have all the colors. And that's how you normally, and this is what they call hex color palette. So you need to understand which green. And that's how we need to really zero down the scope. I know, ma'am, this doesn't answer complete of your question, but whenever you do the WBS, you'll understand exact work items, exact color palette to be precise. Okay? Sure.
Yeah.
Uh,
Thank you.
yeah, no problem. Most welcome, ma'am. Any other questions on scope management as of now? Okay, let me move on to the next one. Okay, in project management, the PM book, we have these kind of diagrams also. Let me try to explain this diagram as well, because for a reading, this gives you a really good way of what type of documentations are being created or referred. The first left-hand side is the input, and the right-hand side is the output. The processing is basically mentioned in between, but let's try to understand as a diagrammatic, here they are more concentrating on input and output rather than a processing. Okay, so let's try to understand. 4.1 is develop project charter. So here we are trying to review project charter, and that is kind of inclusion to the plan scope management. Then project management plan. So we have 3 project management plan. which we normally refer, which we normally include in our plan scope management. Quality management plan, the QMS, the project life cycle description, whatever you chosen, which version, and all those things. The development approach, which type of development approach have you chosen? Again, the organizations might have labeled some different organizations within DevOps as well to choose a particular set of tool sets. Okay, so like with JUnit version 4, you might have a DevOps 4. With JUnit version 6, you might have DevOps 6 to be adopted too, and you might choose one of them. Then enterprise organizations, like we have EEFs and OPAs to help our building project plan scope management. The outputs are scope management plan and requirement management plan, or you can say the updates are to the requirement management plan, and you start building the scope management plan at the first time. Then you push the updates to the scope management plan whenever you review scope management plan if there are any changes. Does that make sense? And again, these are personality traits. Somebody likes diagram, somebody likes those charts like these, right? Whatever mentioned in the PM book. Be my guest, choose either or, and please try to be uniform in reading project management, the PM book, so that you'll understand in your own way or the simplest possible way. Does that make sense to you? Any question?
Requirements management plan again as output?
Requirement management plan updates are the output, because the RTM does change, right? See, whenever you mark one scope item out of scope or move to sprint 2, sprint 4, release 2, release 4, depending upon that, you normally update the RTMs or the requirement, right? Yes. And that's why they've included it as an update to the requirements management plan. Okay. Basically, as I told you, it's mostly the RTM rather than the complete management plan. RTM is just a table, requirement traceability matrix. Okay. Does that answer your question, ma'am?
Yes, got it.
Anybody else have any question?
No.
Okay. Okay. Now collect requirements. Again, as I told you, project manager doesn't collect requirement, but project manager is really instrumental in validating those requirements and redefining the scope. Let me rewrite the word, pronounce the word redefine. Redefine in the sense whatever is defined by the business analyst as scope has been validated by the project manager rather than reinventing the wheel. So sorry, redefining the project scope is not the right word. So I have clearly mentioned here, we shouldn't use the word redefine. We mostly have to use revalidate. So revalidation is the right word to be used whenever you do collect requirement here. So project manager is just validating the requirement and making sure he understands them, making sure he knows the length and breadth of the requirement, and that's what the scope means. The inputs are project charter or the SRS or FRS or whatever document and agreements we have collected or given approval from the client side. Then the project management plan, again the scope management plan, because if there are an addition, subtraction, modification, I need to basically modify the scope management plan. Then I have requirements management plan, which also part of scope management plan, one way or the other. Then I have stakeholder engagement plan. Now, this is the brilliant stroke. This is the brilliant stroke from PMI. Why stakeholder engagement plan? Can anybody guide me on that? Why they have included stakeholder engagement plan in collect requirement?
Because to validate the requirements, they have to communicate with all the stakeholders, right?
Right. To see which stakeholders have to be connected to get the requirements.
Right, that's also very good. But let me tell you, the most important part here, the sanctioning of requirements. In case if there are new requirements which are approved by CCBA or sanctioned by somebody at client place, he or she must have the authority to it, because every requirement which are sanctioned attached some revenue with it, right? So in every organizations, There are certain individuals who have given the authority and authentication to sanction revenue for any external party, because as a technical partner, I'm an external party to the stakeholder. As an Infosys, I'm a different organization than State Farm, right? So within State Farm, there'll be hardly few people who have the authority and authentication to sanction such requirement for me. So for that, I need to be really careful if that stakeholder, whoever give you requirement, either he or she should have the authority and authentication to sanction it, or he should get it for me, because we are finalize the requirement, right? For a current sprint, next sprint, even being flexible, I need to make sure all the requirements which comes to me or CCB has to be approved financially. It means that if the requirement takes 3 days of resource effort, so many dollars has to be added to the kitty of accrued or approved revenue. What does this mean? Like the work which is additionally added to the scope has been paid, or at least they have agreed to pay in principle. Could you understand me? Any questions here on stakeholder engagement plan within collect requirements? Have you, could you understand what I'm trying to say here, madam, sir?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is really crucial, thing. We might have missed this thing, approval and sanctioning. Stakeholder is just not the stakeholder. It's not the list of people. These are the list of people who have certain rights and privileges. So whenever you talk to CEO, CTO of the world, you will consider, well, I need to be really diplomatic. Whenever you consider talking with the executive, yeah, you can be a bit, direct or, to the point, but still, if you want to be diplomatic, that's well and good, and so on. So I normally, what you can say, modify my communication according to the stakeholder levels. Then the project documents, assumption log, if there are new additions, any risky items which have got added, any items which have too many dependencies, and so on and so forth, I'll mark it so. And I'll also add a relevant item to the assumption saying, I assumed these are instruments available in the market which are required for these requirements mentioned by the client, sanctioned by the client. And all these things normally reflects in our risk register also. Then we have lessons learned register. Lessons learned register in terms of stakeholder engagement predominantly. So if any really difficult stakeholder, if I don't know how to tackle, I might request my sales team. Here, sales manager, could you please talk to Mr. Ravindra? He's really, not so diligent with me. So the sales manager might know how to handle that person very well. And throughout my organizations, I might have such escalation stakeholder engagement requirement as well. And it's a part and parcel of life. Even sales manager knows, and even like certain people, we are not get triggered right away, right? So for that, for such scenario, I might need to leverage other organizational part and parcel to make sure I don't create additional conflicts. Again, it also relates to the stakeholder register, because stakeholder register actually has all those details of whom to talk, when to talk, what is his pet name, what is the best way to start communication, and so on and so forth. And stakeholder register is normally referred as a human database or human database to communicate to regarding a specific project. And that's how we normally communicate with the effective communication mechanism. We learn all these things within the communication management knowledge area. Then we have business document, the business case. So these are the input, because these are the core business objective which are applicable to the project, to the given project, product or services at hand. Then of course, just to make sure, I'll review all the agreements for any penalty clause, any clause which says if you are delayed, you need to pay so and so things. Or if you can't deliver within so and so date, you will pay me so and so much revenue. These are really important, because these change your priority. Wherever I have a penalty clause, I need to make sure I'll address all those, scopes on priority. so that that penalty clause can be nullified. Then I'll keep doing the other non-priority items. And that's why the agreements, the SLAs are really crucial as far as collect requirement or review requirement, whatever you want to call it. Then, of course, the enterprise environmental factor to make sure if there are any delays, any additional changes in our project management approach, methodologies, or dependencies, and of course, organizational process assets. This also relates to the quality processes, templatization at your organizational level where you are working for. Let's move on to the tools and technique. Here, of course, we include expert judgment. Just to make sure if you're a first-time project manager, the senior project manager will help you to understand the scope, understand how to manage the scope. And again, these are specifically domain-specific or technology-specific traits. So that's why a senior project manager can guide you on a much practical sense rather than a theoretical sense. Then we, of course, have a data gathering or requirement collections in case if there are any gaps in collecting requirements, or if I have to go to the nth level to make sure I understand the exact requirement by the client. And typically the scenario like Mera Wala green, right? So I'll try to understand what that green is, what's the exact color palette, and I'll include that thing in my scope management. Then, of course, for data gathering, I can have brainstorming, interviews, focus group discussion, questionnaire and survey, and benchmarking. These are different tools and techniques to discuss in detail, in depth with the relevant other party. The other party can be a client, other party can be a vendor, other party can be one of your senior organizational member as well, like PMOs, SMEs, COMEs of the world. Then we do data analysis in terms of if you have any challenges in making some decisions. You might collect some auditory artifact, cost, facilities, warranty, and so on and so forth. And you might basically include in the decision making where you can go with the voting or multi-criteria decision analysis with number of Excel sheet or number of such items to be chosen from, and then you'll make your decisions. And you normally archive this artifact in your basically the knowledge archival or specific decision making criteria archival folder as well. Then you have a data representation. What is data representation? How you extended this requirement, how you elaborated this requirement. Normally these are done by the architect and designers of the world, but they have included it for project manager. The affinity diagram or a mind mapping. We had a look at mind mapping in our business analysis. Many affinity diagrams are also similar tools set. Normally done by the architects and designers of the world. The project managers just include those things in our basically scope management plan or the requirement management documentation, saying okay, these are the things where we have elaborated the requirements and got it approved from the client. Nowadays, we don't normally do these kind of diagramming. We just do requirement in depth in an Excel sheet, in a WBS manner, or in a hierarchical elaborative manner. You will see whenever we do the WBS. Then interpersonal and team skill. Here, as I told you, specifically the stakeholder engagement can be a bit challenging here. That's why they have included these three traits as an inclusion to the project managers abilities: nominal group technique, observation and conservation techniques, and facilitation techniques. Here we are trying to work with the stakeholder who might be difficult with certain strategies like carrot and stick, good or bad, good cop, bad cop, and all those scenarios. So here they are trying to basically jot down what normal group techniques are, how to basically calm down an agitated stakeholder. Why haven't you considered my requirement for a current sprint? These can be really confronting communication challenges which we need to ignore. Then we have observation and conversation. In terms of client, we need to really be in a listening mode. So what I'll do, I'll try to understand him or her view, try to create some conversation techniques to make sure I calm him down with the best possible conflict resolving techniques. And that's why the observation and conversation is one of the most or good technique for conflict resolution. Then of course I facilitate different meetings, different gatherings, different discussions with the individual. Might be the stakeholder or a difficult stakeholder with my sales manager, difficult stakeholder with my designer or architect, or difficult stakeholder with my PMOs, to make sure they explain him how their new additions needs to be approved, sanctioned from their top officials, to make sure this relevant revenue reflection do happen at the control account level or the financial levels. Then of course there are techniques like context diagram. Context in the sense, like we discussed with our team, like this requirement have been originated from this MOM, elaborated on this meeting, then we actually basically finalized or approved in these by this stakeholder, name, designation, time, and all those things, and so on and so forth. So these are the context we are developing, we are evaluating for a single requirement. So we might have something like context diagram. Here we draw such traceability with different conceptual blocks. So first block can be requirement received on so and so date at so and so meeting by so and so executive. Then it's elaborated, discussed, debated. That's another conceptual block. Then it's approved, sanctioned. That's third conceptual block, and so on and so forth. For every change in status of requirement, I might have a different context box. These conceptual blocks are labeled as a context box. If you want, I can share, videos to build these even interpersonal skill or the context diagramming skills. But nowadays, we normally don't have context diagram. We just follow the RTM because the agility more or less normally ignores additional documentation, or they want to scrub any additional documentation and so save the resource work or resource schedule deviation. And for that, we normally just what you can say stress on RTM here and there, or RTM throughout our project. That's why we normally don't use context diagram. Then we have prototypes. For all complex, difficult project or very big critical project, you normally do prototypes. Prototype is basically a small sample of your project output. So if you're doing attendance management system for around 60 offices across the globe for state arm, the prototype means I try to install 4 or 5 biometric scanning devices and build a small system to understand how the employee react to these attendance management system. Should biometric is the right or iris scanner is the right avenue, then I'll basically do some create some artifact for such and then present it to the client. And this kind of initial execution of a project on a realistic timeline, realistic practical scenario, it's called prototyping. So here, these are normally used techniques for very critical projects, either cross critical, mission critical, schedule critical. Otherwise, we don't normally use prototype. There are 2 outputs mentioned here: the requirements documentation, the requirement list, and the requirement traceability matrix are here. We have discussed these items at length, so I will not discuss that. Any questions in collect requirement? Please
No.
let me know in the WhatsApp group. And context diagram.
So your voice is breaking.
There might be some connection.
I think there's some problem with the mic probably.
How's now?
There is some disturbance. Maybe if everyone can mute who are not talking, that would help, I guess.
Okay, how's now?
And now it's better. Now it's better.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, okay. So, any questions on these?
No, but I don't think it is still very clear. It's not much better.
Why do you think? Okay, let's do one thing. Let's review this thing. I'll release the recording also. Go through it, and then in the next session we might revise whatever is not clear. Don't worry, I'm with you for next 6-8 months. So we have ample of time. So do let me know if you have any challenges here. Okay, let's move to the defined scope. Now here we are defining scope. Here it's not kind of redefinition, but it's more of validation again. So we are validating scope for given execution. Now we can understand here what type of scope planning we are doing, and these scope planning are according to the schedule we are going to follow, and that's why these scope planning we go to the nth level and understand what all are inclusion to the scope. So when you say I need to build a single story house, does the staircase is an inclusion? The border to the staircase is an inclusion? Does the lighting is an inclusion? Does the soundproof the windows or door, if you want, is that inclusion, or could we do it as the next phase? And these all scenarios are normally defined in the defined scope parameters, or rather we can say detailing scope type of process scope here, and detailing in reference to the schedule. Because whenever you attach a schedule to a scope, we are trying to understand the criticality of time. We are trying to understand when needs to be delivered to the client. And in some scenario, we might need more resources than actually we thought of. So the cost increases. So now here also the quality triangle plays a crucial part in actually defining the scope or understanding the scope. The inputs are project charter. We have to understand what all inclusion in the basic scope and the flora and fauna around it. Scope management plan, which is normally scope, and you might go on detailing it to the nth level to make sure it's ready to be attached with the schedule. So here I normally create a detailed activity list, and we'll understand what is the activity list or a task list or a diagram list in the next slide. But here let's try to understand. We are going to define scope at the nth level. In the scenario where I can actually estimate the timelines required for each and every of these tasks. Then the project documents are assumption laws, requirement documentation, and restriction. The assumption log for any assumption I have added to the given scope to make sure this will get completed and these many asks and so on. So then again, if there are any additional requirements, like this has to be done in specific color, specific time, before specific day, I'll include that in the requirement document. The risks, if there are any dependencies or risk or any additional assumption, the risk register will also get updated accordingly. And of course, instructor and OPAs are there to help you out to create a really efficient and use expert judgment. We might have to do data analysis in terms of alternatives available. Should we choose this color, that color, this technique, that technique? Should we choose this skill, that skill, .NET or Java or Android or whatnot? The decision making, I normally create all the artifacts required for any multi-criteria decisions, as we've seen in data analysis. I also use interpersonal skills in terms of facilitations, and I might include a networking here as well, because the more your network in terms of might be a vendor, might be a really senior person who can guide you on a specific domain, specific tools and techniques to be applied within your project management plan. And then product analysis. Here, product analysis specifically mentioned for any third-party product, you're going to include in the scope. And all such scenarios we normally discuss, define in the actual defined scope or actual, what you can say, elaborating scope that kind of scenario. So the decisions like, should we choose biometry? Should we choose iris scanner in our enhanced attendance management solution? Actually, get implemented or decided in this plan, the scope management. Okay, Now here, let's try to understand. We have started from a basic objective in a project charter, basic project objective. Then we have elaborated that objective, saying for it enhancing attendance management plan from a human to an automatic way. We need to have something like biometric scanner, iris scanner. Then we need to have something like centralized database so that everybody across the globe can have a look at it and so on and so forth. Now, these evolution actually lead down to procure some third-party entities, third-party softwares, third-party hardware, infrastructure, whatnot. All those scenarios are normally decided in this product analysis, which to choose from, why we have chosen those things, or should we have a mix and match of both. Like this, we define and decide. Project scope statement. Now, project scope statement is the basic core objective of a project.
But there's a lot of disturbance actually. I don't know about others.
There's nothing changed on my side. Okay.
I think there's some problem with the mic.
Yeah, there's some static, a lot of static, and it's causing disturbance. If you're talking, we are not able to hear at all, actually.
Talking right now, I'm just trying to understand how I can controls. I'm having looking at meeting control, frankly speaking, right now. Do you hear me out? Am I audible?
Sir, you are audible, but I think there is some problem with your mic wire. That's why there is some static coming out while you're speaking.
Okay, let's complete this output thing today, and then I might check out like if there's a problem or I need to get some new mic. So don't
Yeah,
worry.
there's some problem with your mic, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay, no problem. Let's try to understand the outputs, the project scopes statement. So we basically build a project definite mission vision kind of statement here, which normally relates to the core project objective. And then there are project document updates like assumption log, requirement documentation, RTM, and stakeholder register, just to make sure if there are any additional critical stakeholder got added to your list. Then assumption log, we discussed about if there are any new additional assumptions. The RTMs are of course get updated for any detailing of these requirements. Okay. So, let us stop here today and let me check on my mic settings and all those things, and then we'll take it up.
Yes, I think that would be better because it's very, very, there's a lot of disturbance.
No, we're not able to hear you, sir.
17th May, 17 May.
Sure. 17th.
Yeah, let's meet there. Okay.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks a lot. You have a great weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.